Today, we'll be taking a deeper dive into hormones, the types, how they work, and the specific examples you will need to know for your exams. I've made another video that gives an overview of hormones and the concept of homeostasis. I recommend you watch that video before coming to this, as it will help you better understand and appreciate what I'll be covering in this video. I'll leave a link to that video in the description below. Now, back to hormones. There are two main categories of hormones: peptide hormones and steroid hormones. Both are secreted by endocrine glands and get transported via blood. Comparing the two, peptide hormones are amino acid based and water soluble, which means that they cannot pass across the lipid membrane of cells. Steroid hormones, on the other hand, are cholesterol based and lipid soluble, meaning that they can pass through the lipid bilayer with no issue. These differing characteristics of peptide and steroid hormones affects its mechanism of action, which is the main differentiating point between the two. It is important to be able to compare these two mechanisms, as this is something that is commonly tested in exams. Starting with peptide hormones, as they cannot pass across the cell membrane, it binds extracellularly to a receptor protein, forming a receptor complex. The receptor complex goes on to activate secondary messengers, initiating a cascade reaction, leading to the activation of a transcription factor here. This transcription factor then enters the nucleus, where it influences genetic expression of the cell. This modified gene expression takes the form of an effect at a cellular level. With enough hormone activation, this can lead to amplification of the signal at a tissue level, organ level, and eventually a systemic level. Steroid hormones, on the other hand, act more directly due to its ability to enter the cell. It binds to an intracellular receptor protein to form a hormone receptor complex. This complex acts as a transcription factor as well, entering the nucleus and binding to DNA at the promoter region to regulate gene transcription, just as is the case for peptide hormones. It is important to note at this point that the effect of regulating gene transcription can be either stimulative or inhibitory, where for both steroid and peptide hormones, the effect of the final activated receptor complex controls protein synthesis of the cell, which ultimately controls the activity and behavior of the targeted cell. To better appreciate this concept of gene regulation and expression, do check out my mind map video on molecular genetics and DNA. Link is in the description below. Now, let's talk a little bit about the hypothalamus, the king gland that regulates endocrine glands. The importance of the hypothalamus comes in the form of controlling hormone secretion of the pituitary gland. This is because the hormones secreted by the pituitary gland are crucial for control of many bodily functions, such as growth, developmental changes, reproduction, and very critically, homeostasis. The relationship between the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland can be seen in two parts, that with the anterior and posterior pituitary gland. The pituitary gland can be split into these two parts, where the way that the hypothalamus triggers these two glands differs slightly. For the anterior pituitary gland, neurosecretory cells of the hypothalamus releases hormones into the capillaries at the hypothalamus. The secreted hormones then travel via the bloodstream into the anterior pituitary gland, which subsequently triggers the release of hormones synthesized by the anterior pituitary gland. These are examples of these hormones. For the posterior pituitary gland, nerve endings of neurosecretory cells of the hypothalamus extend all the way into the pituitary gland, where the hormones are directly secreted in the posterior gland, triggering the secretion of posterior pituitary hormones. These are just some examples. Now, having understood the mechanisms of hormones, how they act and are regulated, let's go into some specific examples that you will need to know. We have growth hormone, which is a peptide hormone secreted by the pituitary gland. As the name suggests, it is responsible for growth, where it has multiple effects including protein synthesis, mineralization of bone, increase in muscle mass, and the general growth of organs. Next, we have prolactin and oxytocin, two pituitary hormones that are responsible for milk secretion. Prolactin stimulates mammary glands to grow and produce milk, where the production of prolactin itself is stimulated by the increased levels of estrogen during pregnancy. Interesting, however, is that while estrogen increases prolactin production, it also inhibits its effect, meaning that during pregnancy, there's a lot of prolactin lying around that does not carry out any effect of producing milk. Only after the birth of the child, where estrogen levels begin declining, does milk production begin, as the inhibitory effect on prolactin is removed. This makes sense if you think about it, as milk is only needed after the baby is born. As for oxytocin, it works hand in hand with prolactin, where it stimulates the movement of milk from alveoli to the central chamber for breastfeeding. We will come back to this nature of science portion after covering the other hormone examples. Another hormone you will need to know is melatonin, also known as the sleep hormone. It is produced by the pineal gland in darkness or low light environments, where photoreceptors in the retina detect the change in light, sending impulses to the hypothalamus, eventually leading to the production of melatonin. The effect of melatonin is the synchronization of the body's circadian rhythm to a specific sleep time, which explains the phenomenon of jet lag, as the pineal gland continues secreting melatonin according to the circadian rhythm as set in the departure location, leading to its well-known symptoms. One thing to note is that melatonin secretion decreases with age, which explains the increased difficulty to sleep that comes with age. The next hormone to know is leptin. It is produced by adipose tissues and increases in production when there is a greater deposition of adipose tissue. Leptin acts as a signal that the body has had enough food, where it targets the appetite control center in hypothalamus to inhibit appetite. The real-life application of leptin is its potential use in the understanding and treatment of obesity. In a study done on obese mice, it was found that the administration of leptin in mice that could not produce leptin endogenously led to a significant decrease in its body mass. However, when this was replicated in humans, the effect on body mass was not as successful. Take note of this experiment and its outcome under your Nature of Science portion. The last hormone to note is thyroxin. It is produced by the thyroid gland and has the effect of increasing metabolism in the body. As it regulates metabolism, it hence also has a role in controlling body temperature. When body temperature changes, this gets detected by the hypothalamus, which then goes on to signal the increase or decrease secretions of thyroxin when body temperature decreases and increases respectively. The effects of thyroxin on temperature regulation comes in three main forms: shivering, increase in brown adipose tissue respiration, and vasoconstriction. Decreased levels of thyroxin have the opposite effect of this. These changes ultimately brings the body back to a normal body temperature. This idea of regulation of body temperature has been discussed in my Introduction to Hormones and Homeostasis mind map. Do check it out for a recap. A last thing to note about thyroxin is that it contains iodine. Therefore, when a person has iodine deficiency, there will be effects on thyroxin production and hence effects on regulation of metabolism. This is the nature of science component that you have to know, where this deficiency disorder is commonly combated by means of iodized salt supplements. At this point, I hope that you are able to appreciate how important hormones are for homeostasis and the relationship between the two. Our body is constantly trying to maintain a constant internal environment that is optimal for bodily function. However, stimuli are ever present, threatening this homeostatic balance. The endocrine system, therefore, plays a very crucial role in maintaining this balance by means of hormonal control. A very important example of this homeostatic balance is seen in glucoregulation in the blood. This is regulated by insulin and glucagon hormones, which are produced by the pancreas. Insulin being produced when blood glucose levels are too high, and glucagon being produced when blood glucose levels are too low. The importance of homeostasis is seen in this example, where the loss of glucoregulation can lead to diabetes, both type 1 as well as type 2. This section below has some portions containing two hormones. However, it will be covered in my mind map video on sexual reproduction. Do check that one out. This brings me to the end of my mind map on hormones and homeostasis. Hope you guys find it useful and have a good day.